The evening air carried the smell of grilled food and fake laughter. It was supposed to be a family gathering, a small get-together that promised warmth, music, and smiles. Everyone seemed so effortlessly happy, their laughter spilling into the night like nothing in the world could touch them. But beneath all that noise was a silence that didn't belong, the kind that creeps in when you're out of place, even in your own bloodline. Walking into that backyard felt like stepping into an old memory, one that still hurt. The hope was simple. Maybe this time things would be different. Maybe the distance that had grown over the years would fade under the string lights and laughter. Maybe, just maybe, peace could exist between people who once called each other family. But sometimes the heart doesn't see what the eyes already know. The moment of arrival wasn't greeted with warmth, but with glances that felt sharp enough to wound. Conversations paused, eyes exchanged meaning, and then those shallow smiles appeared, too polite to be genuine. The music played louder, almost as if to cover up the tension that was hanging in the air. Still, there was an effort to blend in, to sit down, to smile through the unease, and pretend that everything was normal. Food was served, drinks passed around, and laughter rose again. But this time it was louder, meaner, and directed with purpose. It started small. A joke slipped into a conversation, a teasing remark wrapped in humor. At first, it was easy to ignore, to laugh along and pretend it didn't sting. But soon the laughter grew bolder, the words more personal. Every sentence carried a hint of mockery, every punchline hit closer to the heart. It wasn't just casual teasing, it was a reminder of every failure, every moment of weakness, every time things didn't go right, and they enjoyed it. The crowd's laughter wasn't shared, it was aimed. The sound became a wall of noise, echoing louder than the music, sharper than any insult could be. The realization hit like a slow sinking weight. This wasn't about jokes or fun. This was about humiliation, about making one person the center of their entertainment. It was a game to them, a way to bond over someone else's pain. The laughter turned into a cruel chorus, the kind that makes the air heavier and the heart colder. The attempt to stay calm turned into a silent battle, to not break down, to not let their eyes water, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing how deep it cut. That night wasn't about food or family. It was about power, about reminding who didn't belong at that table. Every mocking laugh carved a truth that couldn't be ignored anymore. Some wounds aren't caused by strangers. They're handed out by the people who share your blood. And beneath the soft glow of backyard lights, a quiet decision began to form, one that would change everything that came after. The laughter reached a point where it stopped sounding like humor and started sounding like cruelty. Every sentence out of his mouth carried a sting wrapped in sarcasm. The crowd around the fire pit laughed louder with each punchline, feeding on the humiliation like it was part of the night's entertainment. It wasn't just about old memories or light teasing. It was about turning pain into their amusement. He stood there, drink in hand, smirking as he reenacted moments that were never meant to be shared. He mocked the way life had fallen apart, the decisions that hadn't gone right, the mistakes that were supposed to stay private. Each word felt heavy, deliberate, meant to dig deeper and remind everyone how far things had fallen. The laughter from the crowd blended with the music, but it was impossible to hear anything else. Faces that once felt familiar now looked strange, twisted by amusement and cruelty. No one tried to stop him. No one said a word. Some even joined in, adding small comments and jokes to keep the fire burning. What hurt most wasn't the insults. It was the realization that not a single person saw the wrong in it. They enjoyed the show. They were entertained by someone else's pain. And he, someone who once stood for family, seemed proud of it, proud of being the one to humiliate, to belittle, to make others laugh at someone who had already been broken enough. Then came the silence, brief but loud enough to fill the space. That was when she spoke. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, carrying a tone that dripped with bitterness. The words that left her mouth weren't shouted or exaggerated. They were simple, yet sharper than anything else said that night. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just leaned closer, looked directly, and said something that froze everything for a moment. It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, but the meaning landed like a blade. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a tease. It was a wish for misfortune, said so easily that it almost sounded like a casual remark. That one line made the laughter around fade into background noise. It was no longer about public humiliation or being the subject of jokes. It became something darker. Her words carried something cold, something that didn't come from anger, but from deep resentment. It showed that what existed beneath their laughter wasn't just dislike. It was a hidden desire to see pain, to see failure, to see suffering. There's something haunting about realizing that the person standing across from you doesn't just enjoy mocking you. They genuinely want to see your life fall apart. The rest of the night became a blur of noise, faces, and empty conversations. Nothing felt real anymore. The smiles were masks, the laughter forced, the food tasteless. The realization of betrayal had already sunk in. It wasn't the mockery that broke the spirit. It was that quiet, whispered cruelty from someone who once called you family. The air around that gathering grew colder, even though the fire still burned. The warmth that should have come from shared memories was replaced by a suffocating silence filled with unspoken truths. Standing among those faces once meant comfort. It's a sense of belonging, but that night made it clear there was no place left there. Every look, every laugh, every whisper was a reminder of distance, of being an outsider in a circle that was once called family. What used to feel like home now felt like enemy ground. They didn't see a person trying to reconnect. They saw a weakness to mock, a story to gossip about when the night ended. They didn't see pain behind the quiet. They saw something to feed their pride. That realization settled in slowly, like the sting of a fresh wound. It wasn't just that they didn't care. It was that they enjoyed pretending they did while turning every moment into another cut. There was an ache deep in the chest, one that came not from anger, but from disappointment. How could people who shared the same blood-find joy in watching someone break, how could their laughter sound so light when it was built on someone else's humiliation? The truth was undeniable. They didn't see family anymore. They saw entertainment, a spectacle, something to laugh at, not someone to love. The decision to leave came quietly, almost instinctive. There was no point staying in a place that drained the soul with every breath. The noise around didn't fade when walking away. It grew louder. It's like it wanted to chase every step out of that backyard. Each laugh behind felt like another knife in the back, twisting just to make sure the message was clear. You were never one of them, and you never would be. But instead of reacting, instead of shouting or defending, the choice was silence. The kind that speaks louder than words, the kind that holds back every tear until the door finally closes behind. Outside, under the night sky, the quiet felt heavier than ever. The world seemed still, but inside everything was unraveling. There was a mix of sadness and exhaustion. A sense of finality that couldn't be undone. It wasn't the first time things had gone wrong, but it was the last time there would be hope for it to go right. That night changed something. It stripped away the last bit of belief that family automatically means loyalty or love. Sometimes it means nothing more than shared blood and shared pain. The tears didn't come until later, when the pretending stopped, when the heart couldn't hold it anymore. There was no dramatic breakdown, just a quiet realization that something had ended for good. The laughter from earlier echoed faintly in memory, but this time it no longer hurt the same way. It became a reminder of truth, a moment that opened the eyes to what had always been there, but was never seen clearly before. That night marked the end of pretending and the beginning of something colder, stronger, and far more determined. The next morning carried a strange heaviness, the kind that lingers after a night that changes everything. The house felt quieter than usual, yet that silence screamed louder than any argument could. The mind kept replaying every word, every mocking laugh, every look that confirmed just how deep the betrayal ran. There was a need to understand, to make sense of why family could find joy in breaking someone they once loved. But sometimes understanding doesn't come. It just leaves you with more pain. And just when the hurt started to fade into numbness, the words that would burn forever were overheard. It wasn't meant to be heard. It slipped out of a conversation between her and someone else, casual, heartless, almost playful. The tone was light, but the meaning was venom. She said she wished there'd be an accident, something bad enough to make life easier for her. Not just anger, not frustration, pure cruelty disguised as a passing remark. There was no shock in her voice, no hesitation, just indifference, like wishing harm was something normal. Hearing it didn't bring tears right away. It brought stillness, a kind of cold that spread from the chest to the fingertips. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was hatred, and it was coming from someone who should have been a protector, not a destroyer. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. Every heartbeat felt louder, every breath harder to take. The floor beneath didn't feel steady anymore. That sentence replayed again and again, each time cutting deeper. It wasn't the wish itself that hurt most. It was how easily it came out, how naturally it was spoken, how little it seemed to matter. That was the moment when something inside finally broke. The part that kept hoping for change, for kindness, for any sign of care, simply disappeared. The pain turned into something else, something sharper, something that no longer wanted pity. It wanted justice. There's a point where sadness stops feeling like weakness and starts turning into fire. That moment was it. The heart no longer ached, it burned. The memories of laughter, mockery, and cruelty all blurred together into one realization. They needed to learn what it felt like to be powerless, to be hurt, to be left alone in their own darkness. It wasn't about revenge out of hate. It was about making them understand the weight of every word they had thrown so carelessly. That decision wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and certain. There was no plan yet, just the promise of change. The kind of change that doesn't come from words, but from actions, from proving that no amount of cruelty could destroy what they thought was weak. That moment of overhearing wasn't the end. It was the beginning of transformation, of strength born from betrayal, of silent revenge built not on anger, but on the need to reclaim dignity. From that day on, nothing would ever be the same again. Something shifted after that day, something deep and irreversible. The tears stopped coming, replaced by a calm that wasn't peace but purpose. There was no desire to explain anything anymore. No need to prove innocence or beg for understanding. The realization had settled in completely. No one was coming to make things right, and no apology could undo what was done. So instead of chasing love that wasn't there, the focus turned inward. Every word that once hurt became motivation. Every insult became fuel. The same people who laughed would one day choke on their own words. That wasn't a hope. It was a promise. The days that followed became quieter, but filled with something new, determination. There were no more wasted hours replaying what happened. No more reaching out to people who thrived on humiliation. Energy that once went into trying to belong now went into rebuilding. Each morning started earlier. Every effort was sharper. Every failure turned into a lesson instead of another scar. The decision was simple but powerful, to rise so high that their cruelty couldn't reach anymore. No more explaining, no more defending, just silent work. Silence became the weapon. Success became the voice. They had called it weakness, they had called it failure, but they didn't understand what happens when someone is pushed too far. They didn't realize that pain, when embraced, becomes power. Every night before sleep, those mocking laughs echoed again, not to wound, but to remind. Each memory became a spark, pushing harder toward goals that once seemed distant. And slowly, the world began to change. Opportunities appeared. Recognition came. The hard work started speaking louder than their gossip ever could. The same people who once mocked started noticing. The same faces that once laughed began to turn quiet. There's a unique kind of revenge that doesn't need confrontation. It's the kind where you rise so high that those who tried to break you are forced to watch you from below. That was the kind of revenge being built. Wordless, graceful, undeniable. There was no gloating, no need to remind them of what they had done. The truth was visible in every success, in every quiet achievement. It wasn't about proving worth to them anymore. It was about proving it to oneself. And as the achievements grew, so did the confidence. What once felt like emptiness now felt like strength. The pain that came from their mockery transformed into resilience, unshakable and real. It became clear that the best answer to cruelty isn't destruction, it's transformation. The ones who laughed out of arrogance would soon realize they had built their own downfall. Because nothing hurts people like that more than watching the one they broke become unbreakable. And in that silent rise, there was power, freedom, and a quiet satisfaction that no apology could ever give. Time has a way of revealing truth to those who once chose to ignore it. The same faces that once laughed and whispered now watched in silence, unsure of what to say. Their confidence had faded, replaced by guilt that they could no longer hide. The mockery that once filled their voices was gone, and in its place came uneasy smiles and hesitant words. The tables had turned, not through confrontation or revenge, but through quiet transformation. The person they once belittled had become everything they said would never happen. Every cruel joke, every insult, every act meant to humiliate had built the strength that now stood before them. The world that had seemed so small before had grown wider, brighter, stronger. Success had become the armor, thick, unshakable, and earned. While they stayed in the same cycle of gossip and bitterness, life moved forward with grace and purpose. They could see it now, the difference between someone who grows through pain and someone who hides behind it. Their attempts to reconnect came too late, and their apologies sounded hollow. Time had stripped their words of meaning. They tried to rewrite the past, to pretend it hadn't been as cruel as it was, but the memories couldn't be erased. The laughter from that night still lived in the air, and no amount of regret could take it back. What they didn't expect was silence in return. No anger, no outburst, no dramatic confrontation, just quiet indifference. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, and some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. Sometimes the strongest thing one can do is simply walk away. Let them live with the echoes of their actions. Let them feel what it means to be ignored by the person they once underestimated. That silence spoke louder than any revenge ever could. It showed them that their power had vanished, that their cruelty no longer held weight. The silence wasn't out of hate, it was out of peace, real peace. The kind that comes when you no longer need to prove yourself or seek validation from people who broke you. They watched from afar, realizing that the person they tried to destroy had found a way to rise without them. The life they once mocked had become something admirable, something beyond their reach. And in that realization came their regret, the kind that stays, the kind that whispers late at night when the laughter is gone. There's something poetic about life's balance. The same hands that pushed someone down now reached out for help. The same voices that mocked now spoke in apologies. But it was too late. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. The lesson had been learned, the balance restored. And for the first time, there was no anger, just quiet satisfaction. They had finally felt what silence truly means. The same silence that once followed after every cruel word they ever spoke. In the end, this story isn't about revenge. It's about awakening. It's about how betrayal can break something inside you only to rebuild it stronger, sharper, and wiser. Sometimes life teaches lessons through pain, through humiliation, through moments when the people you trust most become your biggest disappointment. But what matters isn't what they did, it's what came after. It's the rise that followed, the transformation that turned weakness into power and silence into victory. There's a moment when you stop waiting for apologies, when you realize closure doesn't come from others, it comes from choosing peace over pain. The laughter that once echoed in mockery becomes nothing but background noise in a life that's moved far beyond it. Those who once looked down now watch in quiet regret, while the one they tried to break stands taller than ever. That's not revenge, it's justice born from growth. This journey proves that you don't have to fight to prove your worth. You just have to rise. Let your success speak the truth they try to bury. Let your silence remind them of what they lost when they chose cruelty over compassion. Because sometimes the best way to win isn't to hurt them back. It's to become untouchable. And in that quiet strength lies the greatest victory of all.